The rain came in gently that Thursday evening, not hard enough to ruin anything, just enough to blur the edges of things, the streetlights on Meridian Avenue, the silhouettes of valets in black jackets, the long black cars idling at the curb outside Hargrove's. Ethan Cole stood at the entrance for exactly 3 seconds. He looked at the door. He looked at the parking structure across the street. He looked at the 2 valets. Which one kept his hands busy? Which one was watching the street instead of the cars? Then he pushed the door open and walked in with his daughter. Lily was 8 years old and wearing a dress with small yellow flowers on it. She had her father's eyes quiet and very still, and a sketchbook tucked under one arm. She didn't ask questions about why they were eating somewhere this expensive tonight. She had learned that her father sometimes had reasons for things that he would explain later, and sometimes he wouldn't explain at all. And both were fine. The maitre d' took one look at Ethan, dark jeans, clean but unironed shirt. No watch, no tie. And his expression did a very subtle, very professional thing that was not quite a frown and not quite a smile. Reservation? Cole. 8 o'clock. A pause, the kind designed to communicate something without saying anything. Of course, Mr. Cole. He lifted 2 menus. Right this way. The table they were given was near the kitchen. This was not accidental. Ethan didn't say anything about it. He sat down with his back to the wall and spent 45 seconds looking at the room before he opened his menu. Lily opened her sketchbook and began drawing the chandelier. Hargrove's was the kind of restaurant that existed to remind people of their own significance. Dark wood paneling. Low amber lighting. Tables set with 3 forks and 2 wine glasses and linen napkins folded into shapes that took practice. The clientele that Thursday evening were the expected variety. 2 corporate tables running what looked like a post-merger dinner, a group of older men in suits near the back, who had the specific body language of people who had known each other for 30 years and stopped pretending to like each other around year 15, a couple near the window who were not talking but performing the act of not needing to talk. No one noticed Ethan. This was normal. He was designed for it. He had spent 11 years in threat assessment and risk consulting, first for a government contractor in Virginia, then privately, then not at all. Because his wife, Caroline, had died on a Tuesday morning in March 3 years ago, and after that the work had stopped making sense in the way it once had. What remained was Lily and a house outside Portland, and a very specific set of habits he couldn't turn off even when he wanted to, like sitting with his back to the wall, like counting exits, like noticing, as he opened his menu, that the man who had entered the restaurant 40 seconds before them had not been greeted by the maitre d', had not been given a menu, had walked directly to the bar, as if he knew exactly where it was, and sat down at the far end, with the careful stillness of someone managing their own visibility. Ethan looked at the menu. The pan-seared halibut, he read. The lamb chop with rosemary reduction. Dad, Lily said. Mem, can I get the pasta? Yes. She went back to drawing. He went back to reading the menu and watching the room in the way that didn't look like watching. The man at the bar was mid-40s. Broad. Dark jacket. Nothing notable. He had ordered something but wasn't drinking it. His eyes moved across the room in a pattern not random, not curious, methodical. Left wall, right wall, back wall, entrance, left wall, right wall. Ethan closed his menu. Lily, he said quietly. Yeah? Don't touch anything on the table yet. Not the water, not the bread. She looked up at him. He smiled at her. She looked back down at her sketchbook. Lily Cole had a gift for understanding that certain instructions from her father did not require an explanation, and that asking for one in the wrong moment could be the wrong decision. She had learned this the way children learn most important things, by watching a parent who never made a big show of anything. The server appeared at their table. She was young, mid-20s, red hair pulled back, name tag reading Sophie. She had the slightly overbright smile of someone working a difficult room on a slow night and doing it competently enough. She looked at Ethan, then at Lily, and the overbrightness softened slightly into something more genuine. Good evening. Can I start you both with something to drink? Water for my daughter, Ethan said. And a sparkling water for me. No lemon. Of course. She left. Ethan watched the man at the bar. The man at the bar was now watching the corporate table near the window. Not the people at it, he was watching the glasses. Sophie returned with 2 glasses of water and a small bread basket. She set Lily's glass down first. Then she reached for Ethan's glass with her right hand. And as she moved to set it on the table, something happened that lasted less than 2 seconds, and which no one at any of the surrounding tables noticed. She exchanged it. The glass she set in front of Ethan was not the one she had carried from the bar. It was a glass she had been holding with her left hand, pressed against her forearm. Invisible from the angle of anyone watching, she set it down. Her hand moved away. Ethan looked at the glass. He looked at Sophie. Her face was composed, professional, but her jaw was tight. And there was a thin film of something at the edge of her eyes that was either exhaustion or the particular specific terror of someone doing something they knew was dangerous and had decided to do anyway. He didn't say anything. He didn't look alarmed. He didn't look at the man at the bar. He looked back at his menu and said, very quietly, to Sophie, "Could you recommend the soup?" She blinked. "The bisque is excellent tonight," she said. Her voice was steady. "Very good." She walked away. Ethan picked up his glass of water and held it at chest height without drinking it. He tilted it slightly, looked at the surface of the liquid against the ambient light. Set it back down. "Dad," Lily said, without looking up from her drawing, "still don't touch anything." "Okay." Ethan reached into the bread basket, tore a small piece of bread, and held it between his fingers without eating it. He was watching the man at the bar, and he was watching the 2 men near the back table, one in a gray suit who had been on his phone since they arrived, and had not once actually looked at it the way people look at their phones when they're using them, and one near the window who had positioned himself between the entrance and the main dining floor in a way that created a very effective line of coverage. 3 of them, minimum. He looked at the corporate table. 12 people. Probably half of them had touched their drinks. He looked at the older men's table. 8 people. Same. He looked at the couple near the window. The woman had her hand around her wine glass. Ethan set his bread down. They poisoned multiple tables. He hadn't read those words yet, but he already understood that this was not about him. He had not been a target in 3 years. No active cases, no ongoing work, no reason for anyone to spend what this operation would have cost on eliminating him specifically, which meant this was something larger. A group event. A room event. Which meant time was the problem now. He looked at the bread basket. He picked it up and turned to the table beside him 2 women in their 50s, both with untouched glasses of white wine in front of them, and said, with easy, apologetic naturalness, "I'm so sorry, I can't stand this bread, and they've given us an entire basket of it. Would you like it? My daughter refuses to eat anything that isn't pasta, so it'll just go to waste." One of the women laughed. "That's very kind. Here." He set the basket on their table, and as he did, he moved their wine glasses 2 inches in a direction that created an obstacle between the women's hands and the glasses. Not dramatic, not conspicuous, just a small reconfiguration that would require a moment's pause before drinking. A moment. It was what he had. He sat back down. Sophie reappeared at his elbow. She had a small, folded piece of paper tucked into the fold of her apron. She set a fresh glass of still water on the table, Lily's, and as she reached past Ethan, she pressed the paper into the side of his menu, with a precision that required her to have been practicing the gesture in her head for at least the last 5 minutes. She left. Ethan unfolded the paper under the table. 4 words, written in ballpoint pen, with the tight, compressed handwriting of someone writing fast and small on purpose. They poisoned multiple tables. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He looked at Lily, who was drawing the older men's table now. She had a particular talent for composition, getting the angles right. "Lily, yeah? I need you to listen carefully and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" She looked up at him. She had Caroline's way of going still when something was important. A quality of absolute attention that she had inherited without knowing she had it. "Yes," she said. "When I say move, you come with me. You hold my hand, you walk quietly, you don't look at anyone. You understand? Is something bad happening?" He looked at her. "Nothing is going to happen to you," he said. "I need you to trust me on that." She looked at him for a moment, the way children look at their parents when they're deciding whether the reassurance is real or performed. Then she nodded and went back to her drawing. And the small, deliberate normalcy of that gesture, the calm made something tighten in Ethan's chest that had nothing to do with the threat assessment. The man at the bar stood up. He moved toward the dining room. Ethan looked at his menu. The man passed within 8 feet of Ethan's table. He didn't look at Ethan. He moved to the back of the restaurant with the specific, purposeful walk of someone who needed to appear to be going to the restroom. His jacket shifted slightly as he moved. And, for half a step, the silhouette beneath it was wrong, in a way that meant something specific. 2 of the older men at the back table had set down their glasses. One of them had his hand pressed flat on the tablecloth. They weren't sick yet, but they weren't comfortable either. Ethan set his menu on the table and looked at the room one more time, with the methodical deliberateness of someone who is building a map they will have to navigate in the dark. Exit. The main entrance was covered. The man in the gray suit had moved subtly, reasonably, the way you would move to stretch your legs to a position that gave him sight lines to the front door and the maitre d' station, not blocking it, just watching it. Exit. The kitchen. Ethan didn't know the layout, but every commercial kitchen of this size would have a service entrance and a loading dock and a fire door. Sophie knew the layout. Emergency, override. The fire suppression system would be controlled from the electrical panel, which in a building this age would be in the basement utility corridor or behind the kitchen manager's office. Triggering it manually wouldn't help in any direct way, but it would bring the fire department inside of 7 minutes and create the kind of chaos that changed the geometry of a situation. Alternative. The power itself. Cut power to the building and the interior became a different space. No cameras, no controlled lighting. Behavioral disruption across the entire room. He needed Sophie. He needed her to come back to his table. He lifted his hand. She saw it from across the room and came over immediately, with the kind of directness that told him she had been watching him the way he had been watching the room, waiting, calibrating. She stopped beside his table. "Is everything all right?" The words were the standard script. Her eyes were not. "I'd like to make a change to our order," Ethan said. He looked at his menu. "The halibut, does it take long?" "About 12 minutes. 12 minutes. He looked up at her. "That's a long time for a kitchen to operate at full capacity." Sophie looked at him. Her expression didn't change, but she understood. He could see it in the slight shift of her shoulders, a release of something, a recognition that she was no longer the only person in this room who knew what was happening. "I can ask the kitchen about timing," she said carefully. "Also," Ethan said. And he adjusted his menu on the table, turning it slightly. Under it, he had written 4 words with the pen he always carried. On the back of the paper she had given him. Power. Kitchen door. 3. He pushed the menu toward her by 2 centimeters. She picked it up, as servers do. She walked away. Ethan looked at his daughter. Lily was drawing a woman at the adjacent table, an elegant sketch of someone in a silk blouse, caught mid-gesture with a wine glass halfway to her mouth. "Lily," Ethan said. "I know," she said quietly. "Don't drink that," he said, and reached over and moved her glass of water away from her. She kept drawing. At 9:17, the lights went out, not all at once. First the back half of the restaurant, then a half-second later, the front. The kind of failure that moved like a wave, rather than a switch, which meant it was done from the panel, manually, by someone who knew which breakers to pull in, which order to create maximum disorientation with minimal noise. The candles on the tables survived. For 10 seconds, the restaurant existed in a warm, amber half-darkness, and the silence of people who didn't know whether to be annoyed or frightened. Then a sound came from the back table. A chair scraped. Something heavy, not falling, collapsing. Then a woman's voice. "Oh God, is he?" Then the screaming started. Not everyone. 3 people. But 3 people screaming in a room with no overhead lights is sufficient. Ethan was already moving. He had Lily's hand before the 3rd scream, and he moved in the direction of the kitchen, because that was the direction Sophie had gone 12 minutes ago, and he moved the way he had been trained to move in compromised low-visibility environments, not fast enough to create a silhouette that registered as a threat, not slow enough to be caught in the choke points that were already forming as the man from the bar moved into the center of the dining room. "Eyes down," he told Lily. She kept her eyes down. He heard a voice cut through the noise from somewhere near the front of the restaurant, not a scream, a voice. Male, controlled, the specific even register of someone delivering prepared words to a prepared situation. "Nobody move. This will be finished quickly." The screaming dropped to crying, to whispering. Ethan pushed through the kitchen door. The kitchen was emergency lit, 2 red exit signs and a flashlight someone had mounted on a shelf above the pass. 2 line cooks stood frozen by the stove. A prep cook had backed himself against the far wall. A sous chef in a white jacket stood in the center of the kitchen, with her hands raised slightly at her sides. Not in surrender, just in the careful posture of someone who has decided the best thing is to not move and to think. Sophie was at the service entrance. She had her phone out, no signal, which Ethan had expected, because a team that had done the electrical work had done the communications work too, and she looked at Ethan and Lily with an expression that moved from relief to focus in under a second. "Is there another way out?" Ethan asked. "Loading dock," she said. "Past the walk-ins, left at the prep station. But the outer door..." She paused. "I don't know if it's covered. What about the electrical panel? Manager's office." "Left of the walk-ins." "Same direction." He looked at her. "You gave me the note," he said. "Yes. How long have you known?" 2 hours. Her voice was tight but even. "They came in before service. I recognized one of them. He was here last month, asking questions about a private event that was booked and then canceled. I didn't put it together until tonight, when I saw what he was doing to the glasses at the bar. You swapped mine. I swapped yours because you were the only person who looked like you'd notice," she said. "I couldn't swap everyone's. There were too many. And I couldn't go to the manager because I didn't know." She stopped. "I didn't know who else was involved." "Smart," Ethan said. She looked at him. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who was in the wrong restaurant tonight," he said. "Or the right one." He looked at the sous chef, who had not moved. "Is there a landline?" he asked her. "Manager's office," she said. Her voice was steady. "Same room as the electrical panel." "Good." He turned to Lily. She was standing very close to him, her sketchbook still under her arm, her face calm with the particular focused calm of a child who has chosen to be brave. He crouched down to her eye level. "Lily, I need you to stay with Sophie. Right here. Do not leave this kitchen. Do you understand?" She looked at him. "Are you coming back?" she asked. It was the question he had been asked 3 years ago. In a different context, by Caroline, in the last month before the diagnosis had stopped being something they could plan around. He had said yes then, and it had not been a lie, and it had still not been fully true. "Yes," he said now. 5 minutes. She nodded. He stood up. The manager's office was a 10 by 12 room that smelled of coffee and order sheets, and the particular stale density of a space used primarily for paperwork. The electrical panel was on the left wall, a gray metal box, older model, the kind where the individual breakers were labeled in a combination of original factory labels and handwritten tape. Ethan looked at the panel for 4 seconds. In a restaurant this size, the emergency lighting was on a separate circuit from the main grid standard code requirement. The interior security cameras were on a 3rd circuit. The communications booster, the device that was killing cell signals in the dining room, was almost certainly plugged into a standard outlet, which meant it was running off one of the general circuits. He pulled the 2 general circuits first, waited. In the dining room, he heard the small shift of ambient sound that meant phones were coming back to life. He pulled the emergency lighting circuit. The kitchen went fully dark for 3 seconds before the battery backups kicked in. Then he picked up the landline phone on the manager's desk and dialed. 911. "What is your emergency?" "Hargrove's Restaurant, 1440 Meridian. Multiple people poisoned. Armed individuals in the dining room. I need law enforcement and medical units. This is not a drill. Sir, I need you to. I'm going to put this phone down without hanging it up, Ethan said. You'll be able to hear the situation. Send everything. He set the phone on the desk. He went back into the kitchen. I need something, he told Sophie. A tray. The largest one. She didn't ask why. She handed him a large service tray, heavy, metal, 18 inches across. Stay here, he said. Your phone should work now. Call 911 if you haven't already. He went back through the kitchen door. The dining room was organized by panic. In the immediate aftermath of the lights going down, the people who had been dosed had become the gravitational center of the room. 2 tables pulled toward confusion, toward fear, toward the sounds of people being very sick very quietly. Everyone else had contracted away from those centers, clustering along the walls, along the far perimeter, seeking the instinctive protection of solid surfaces. The man from the bar heavy, dark jacket was standing in the center of the room. The man in the gray suit was positioned near the front entrance. The third man, the one who had spoken, was near the back, controlling the rear approaches. 3 points in a triangle. Classic containment. The candles on the tables were still burning. Ethan moved along the left wall in the particular way that exists between a walk and a crouch. Not dramatic, not conspicuous, just a man in the dimness moving with the contained economy of someone who was not frightened because he was doing something rather than waiting for something to happen to him. He reached the table nearest the man in gray. He paused. He picked up a water glass from the table and held it loosely at his side. The man in gray was watching the entrance. He was waiting for the next phase of whatever this was, the announcement, the demand, the selection of whoever this had been designed to reach specifically. His eyes were on the door, not on the room behind him. Ethan put the water glass down. He moved 4 steps to the man's left and set the metal tray on the floor with the controlled nearness of someone sliding it into position. Then he straightened up and walked calmly, directly toward the man. Not running, not rushing. The specific composed directness of someone who had already decided what was going to happen and was simply traveling toward it. The man in gray sensed it half a second before it arrived, that particular animal awareness, that something in the room had changed, and he turned, and Ethan hit him in the throat with 2 fingers in a controlled, precise strike that dropped the volume immediately and took his legs out from under him in the same motion. He went down without a sound. No one near the entrance had their eyes on this corner of the room. Every face in the restaurant was turned inward, toward the center, toward the man giving orders, toward the sounds of the sick. Ethan took a breath. 2 left. The man at the center of the room was named Douglas Farrell, though Ethan didn't know this yet. What he knew was the type. He had assessed this type in 37 documented cases over 11 years. The controlled voice, the economy of movement, the suit that fit correctly in a way that communicated money but not ostentation, the eyes that moved the way a camera moved, not with curiosity, not with fear, simply with professional attention to information. This was not a street-level operation. This was planned, financed, professionally staffed, which meant the target was significant. Ethan had been looking at the corporate tables since he sat down. The post-merger dinner, 12 people. He had clocked. In the ambient way he clocked everything, that the host of that table, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the careful posture of someone who had spent decades being photographed, had barely touched his food and had not touched his water, as if he'd been warned, which meant the target was someone else at the table, or the target was making an example. Ethan was standing at the edge of the shadow near the wall, behind the man who had spoken, when that man's phone buzzed in his jacket. He answered it. Yes. A pause. Gray is down? His voice didn't rise, just hardened. Check the kitchen. He turned. He looked directly at Ethan. For a moment there was nothing in the man's eyes except assessment. He looked at Ethan, the way Ethan looked at rooms, quickly, completely, categorically. You shouldn't be in this room, he said. I live here, Ethan said. Something passed over the man's face that was, in another context, almost respect. Cole, the man said, and there it was. Ethan kept his face level. You did your homework. We did our homework 3 years ago, when you were still operational. A pause. "You've been out since your wife died. You're not a factor in this." "I'm standing here," Ethan said. "You're standing here with your daughter in the kitchen." The man's voice was even, professional, without particular cruelty, which was in some ways worse than cruelty. "That's not an asset. That's a liability. My daughter is fine," Ethan said. For now, the word landed the way it was designed to. Ethan looked at the man for a moment. Then he looked at the room, at the people along the walls, at the couple near the window crouched behind an overturned table, at the two women he had given the bread to, pressed together near the bar, at the corporate table where three people were lying forward in their chairs with the heavy specific posture of the dosed and the unconscious. "How many are sick?" Ethan asked. "Manageable. Manageable means they're not dead." "Not yet. Then you still have a problem," Ethan said. "Because your man at the entrance is down. Your man at the bar hasn't checked in, and the 911 call I placed 6 minutes ago means you have between 3 and 5 minutes before the first unit arrives." A pause. "And the antidote," Ethan said. "Which you brought because this was never supposed to be a massacre, it was supposed to be a demonstration. Is in your jacket pocket, left side. I can see the outline." The man looked at him. "You're bluffing," he said. "Check your phone," Ethan said. "Your third man is looking for Gray right now, and finding nothing. You've already lost containment. The question you have to answer in the next 90 seconds is whether you want to be here when the police arrive, or whether you want to have walked out of a restaurant where everyone survived." Silence. The candles on the nearest table threw a low, unsteady light across the space between them. "There's a version of tonight," Ethan said, "where you leave and everyone lives. That version requires the antidote, and it requires you to decide in the next 30 seconds. The man was very still. "You don't know who I work for," he said. "No," Ethan said. "But whoever it is, they sent you to deliver a message. Not create a federal investigation into 8 civilian casualties at a Michelin-starred restaurant. That's not a message. That's a problem." Something shifted. It was small. The specific micro-relaxation of a man who has been holding a decision in tension and has finally let it fall one way rather than the other. He reached into his jacket, left side, and he set a small pharmaceutical case on the nearest table. 2 tablets per person, he said. Activated charcoal and an antiemetic. They'll be sick, but they'll live. He looked at Ethan. "This doesn't end here." "I know," Ethan said. The man walked toward the entrance. He stepped over the man in gray without looking down. He pushed the door open and walked into the rain and was gone. Ethan picked up the pharmaceutical case and turned to the room. "Listen to me," he said. In a voice that carried without being loud the voice of someone who had spent years being listened to. "Everyone who's ill needs 2 of these tablets immediately. I need anyone with medical training to raise your hand. I need everyone else to stay calm and stay put. Law enforcement is 3 minutes away." One hand went up, then another. He moved. The first police unit arrived at 9:31. Ethan had 14 people seated calmly in the dining room by then, including 3 who had been dosed and were sick but stable, held upright by the man who had raised his hand, a cardiologist. As it turned out, who had been at the corporate table and had not touched his drink because he was on a medication that didn't mix well with alcohol. Small mercies. The ones that don't announce themselves. The paramedics were 12 seconds behind the police. Ethan watched the room fill up with the specific organized chaos of first response, the calls for status, the division of the space, the methodical triage, and felt the thing that always happened in the aftermath. The world becoming heavier as the adrenaline withdrew, and what it had been holding back came forward. He went to the kitchen. Lily was sitting on an overturned milk crate near the prep station, drawing in her sketchbook by the light of Sophie's phone. Sophie was sitting on the floor beside her, her arms around her knees, her head tilted back against the walk-in cooler door. She looked up when Ethan came in. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Lily looked up from her drawing. She looked at her father. She looked at him the way she had been looking at him since she was 4 years old, with a complete and serious attention that had always made him feel, obscurely, like he was being graded on something that mattered. She stood up. She walked to him and put her arms around his waist, her head against his chest, and held on. He put his hand on the back of her head. "I knew you were coming back," she said into his shirt. He didn't say anything. He held her. Sophie watched them from across the kitchen with an expression that she had stopped trying to manage. Her eyes were wet. She didn't look away. After a minute, Lily stepped back and looked up at him. "Dad." "Yeah?" The woman at the window table. She held up her sketchbook. The drawing she had made during dinner, the elegant woman in the silk blouse, hand raised, wine glass halfway to her lips. She was about to drink it. "She didn't," Ethan said. "You moved the glass." "I moved the glass." Lily looked at the drawing for a moment. Then she closed the sketchbook. "Okay," she said. They left through the loading dock, not hiding. The police were at the front entrance, and the paramedics were inside, and the organized aftermath of a crisis was something Ethan knew from long experience, how to step sideways from quietly, in the direction of the service entrance, before the name-taking, and the statement-giving, and the 20 questions that would eventually, through the right channels, become something more complicated. There were things he would deal with later. The name that man had known. The fact that this had been organized, funded, executed, the fact that someone had looked at a list 3 years ago and put his name on it and then had not crossed it off. These were later problems. The alley behind Hargrove smelled of dumpsters and rain-wet concrete, and the drizzle had picked up slightly enough to be felt. Not enough to hurry. He heard the door open behind him. Sophie came out in her server's apron, her red hair down now, rain starting to darken it. She stopped a few feet away. The three of them stood in the alley for a moment without speaking. "They'll want a statement from you," Ethan said. "I know." She looked at him. "I know they'll want one from you too. Probably." She looked at Lily. "Are you okay?" she asked. Lily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yes," she said. "I stayed calm." Sophie made a sound that was almost a laugh. "You really did." Lily looked at her. "You did too." Sophie looked down at the pavement for a moment. "You swapped the glass," Ethan said. She looked up at him. "You didn't have to," he said. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't know if I'd understand. You could have just—" He paused. "You did it anyway." Sophie looked at the alley wall. The brick was dark with rain, old mortar bleeding gray. "I saw you come in," she said. "You and her. And I thought—" She stopped. "I thought, whoever he is, he's here with his kid. He shouldn't be the one." Ethan looked at her. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, and he meant them completely, and he didn't add anything to them. She nodded. The rain fell steadily now, finding the rhythm it would hold for the rest of the night. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan looked at the end of the alley. At the street beyond it, amber-lit and rain-blurred, the ordinary continued world of cars and puddles, and a man walking a dog past a closed hardware store, without any idea what had happened 50 feet from where he walked. "You go back in," Ethan said. "Give your statement. You helped save people tonight. They should know that. And you?" He looked at Lily. She was standing in the rain without minding it, her sketchbook under her arm, looking at the end of the alley with a child's calm readiness for whatever came next. "We're going to get something to eat," he said. She never got her pasta. Sophie laughed, a real one this time, short and startled. The kind that comes from relief releasing itself, without asking permission. She looked at them both. Then she looked at Ethan with an expression that had several things in it, gratitude and something more complicated, the specific look of a person who has just shared something unrepeatable with someone they will probably never see again and is deciding how to hold that. "Okay," she said. She turned and went back through the service door. It swung closed behind her. Ethan and Lily stood in the alley in the rain. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah. Are you going to tell me what that was about?" He considered this. "Some of it," he said. She thought about this. "Okay," she said. "But not tonight. Not tonight." She reached up and took his hand. Her fingers were cold from the rain. He curled his hand around hers. They walked out of the alley and into the wet amber light of Meridian Avenue, and turned left. and the sound of the sirens from the front of the restaurant grew smaller behind them. He didn't look back. There was a diner 4 blocks down. He knew it because he knew this neighborhood, the way he knew all neighborhoods he might someday need to navigate in the dark. The distances, the exits, the ordinary geography of a city that didn't know it was always on the edge of everything. The sign was lit. Coffee. Pasta. Something warm. He pushed the door open and held it for his daughter. They went in out of the rain. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who has nothing to prove,